Hi, this is Phil Shapiro here in the Washington, D.C. area. I'm talking with Dan Schneiderman. He's in Rochester, New York. Dan, I have one question I got to ask you. How many snow shovels do you own?
Honestly, maybe three.
I was going to predict. I said you can't get by with two in Rochester. Okay. So I know Dan, he's a maker kind of person and an open source kind of person. And I really was interested to hear more about his story. Just recently, there was the Nation of Makers conference. It was a whole week. Can you tell me about that? What were the high points?
Uh, so this was the first year that the Nation of Makers conference took place virtually, and it was over 4 days this year. There was so much covered. I mean, everything. It had maker leaders from all over the U.S., which was fantastic. I mean, we had everything from people in Anchorage through New York, California, Texas, everywhere, just all over the U.S. And I mean, I loved hearing about some of the new different ways that people have been working in their maker spaces. One of the keynotes was with the open source medical group that started up a few months ago, which I mean, blew everyone away just hearing the numbers about how much PPE and safety equipment's been made. I got to be on two different talks, one on a panel talking about community art installations and working with makers, working on with communities. And the other one was on the Maker Effect Playbook, which is a project I've been working on for the past 8 months now. Wow. And all sorts of other like fun talks. There was a lot about, how to evolve your maker space, a lot about, what's the next step for maker events. There was a lot of talk about how to be more inclusive, tying into everything that's going on in the news, which was fantastic. And honestly, it was just great to see maker friends that I've met over the years.
What was the platform did they use?
We ended up using Zoom
Okay.
for
Okay.
most of it, and then we had Slack in the background, and everyone was taking notes. There was every now and then you'll see a little bit of new technology in it, but it was still pretty good.
Okay, neat. Very interesting. Very interesting. And tell me about that Maker Event Playbook. I'm really curious about that. What's that?
So the Maker Event Playbook came out of a discussion at last year's Nation of Makers conference, where all of us do every different type of event, between maker fairs, hands-on activities, going out to the community, all the different events that you can do in maker spaces. But there's no one resource that tells you how to do all of them, or kind of gets or any place where you can get your feet wet. So a few friends and I got together and started working on this. The main organization was MakerFX in Orlando that led the charge, but all of us had worked together over the years, and we just kind of created this guide using Jekyll on GitHub pages where anyone can contribute and talk about any different type of maker event or all the different things that you need to think about. I mean, we have everything from radios to all the different safety that you'll need, things that can go wrong, material list. I mean, we're trying to even break down signage, but we made it so that anyone can contribute. We made sure that it was all open source, and it's just been a fun project to work on.
I bet. I bet. And, in my own experiences at maker fairs, every time I go and set up a booth, I'm always thinking, okay, what can I learn from this event? What kind of mistakes? And then how do I communicate it to others so that others can benefit from my experience?
That's
And
a lot of what
even
we do.
right, it's a frame of mind saying that, okay, if something is not good this year, that's quite fine. Next year it'll be better. And
You
then, yeah,
always want to find something to
right,
improve, and
right.
there's lots of great ideas from other fairs that I never would have thought of. I mean, that's why a lot of us chat. There's also this great phrase that we have, R&D is research and duplicate.
I like it. I'm really, one thing I think of often when I'm at a maker fair, I'm often thinking about what if the building were designed for a maker fair so that there's more sound insulation between the booths, so that you don't have this like general hubbub din in the background, so that the people, I have a quiet voice. I even bring an amplifier to my maker events so that when people can hear me, one of those personal, they got these little personal ones. They're so cute, $40, So Now, tell me, what are your favorite open source maker tools?
There's a ton out there. I mean, I've been a big fan of Arduino since 2009 when I first got to play around with one in college. Raspberry Pis have been fantastic. One thing when working with younger kids, I love Makey Makeys.
Okay.
I absolutely love playing with those. And a few years ago, I actually did a number of workshops with middle school and high schoolers using circuit playgrounds, the
Okay.
Adafruit circuit playgrounds,
Okay.
which was just great to get kids interested into coding.
Right.
It got them into doing physical devices and kind of thinking of ways to mash them up.
Interesting. Adafruit. That's what quite some companies. You talk about one company having an effect on the entire nation and the world. That's one company that is just astounding how one company can really change things. And I've been following what they're up to. Yeah.
For a while, I did have a bad habit with the site and just buying lots of different
Right.
microcontrollers and kits and
Right.
whatever resources I needed.
Right.
They have fantastic guides.
Yeah, the guides are amazing. I love their videos.
Yes.
Yeah.
Probably my next best resource is the one I go to most, which is Instructables.
Okay, Instructables. Right. I love the iFixit website. iFixit
Yep.
is incredible. Right. Right. Do you visit like opensource.com or not too much? So,
I've gone back and forth with visiting the site. I did a lot when I was working at RIT,
okay.
a little less when I was working with K through 12 students directly.
Right. So you taught, was it a public school, private school, after school?
Informal. It was actually through the STEP program, Science Technology Entry Program, which helps support underrepresented students in STEM and STEAM.
Okay.
For which, I was just trying to introduce them to all sorts of different hands-on tools, to programming. One of the examples of a workshop we did was light design,
Okay.
where up here in Rochester, winter is often miserable. It's
Right.
often
Yeah.
dark out.
Right.
And so in January, I taught them all of these different light designs and how a lot of them are open and you can just start working on it. And we did full spectrum bulbs because that just often helps with seasonal affection disorder.
So interesting. That is so interesting. What was your first computer you had at home?
Oh, that's a tough one because there's a lot of different computers that my family has had where, I mean, at my parents' house, we still have my dad's Commodore 64. I think I might have one of my uncle's old IBM PCs from the 80s. I do not remember my personal one. I just always grew up around them.
Oh, neat. Okay. Interesting. Do you know my own favorite open source project? It's out of Dallas area. It's on YouTube called Trivia Vending Machine. These folks from the Dallas Makerspace, they set up a vending machine with a Raspberry Pi, and the only way to get the food out is to answer trivia questions, science trivia questions. So I think that is one of the most fun and interesting uses of a Raspberry Pi. But their machine is big, so it's not so portable. So we need to design the portable trivia vending machine, and then have the students write their own questions. So that that'd be interesting.
Funny thing about vending machines. When I went to RIT, I was actually a member of this special interest house called Computer Science House, where a lot of, basically imagine a maker space that had been around since the late 70s that you live in.
Right.
With like 50 of your friends, and you're required to do a project. I remember running a seminar series, worked on different projects. Friends of mine did some of the early like multi-touch screen computers. One of my favorite projects was a friend of mine did a Twitter client for an IBM PC Junior.
Okay.
And the amount of work that they did was just crazy to get that to work.
Right.
It's where I got heavily into open source code there.
Okay.
but all sorts of crazy projects. And one of them that had been around that other friends worked on was two drink machines that were connected to the internet and a snack machine.
Okay.
One ongoing project that still has yet to be completed was going to be a robot to go to that drink machine and grab that drink for you and then deliver it to your room, but just never worked.
Right. So makers love to take on a project that doesn't seem feasible and is pretty crazy, right? Maybe our high schools need to teach a class called Unfeasible. It's like we should have a class called, the only thing you can do in that class is things that are not feasible, And,
I would love things like that. I'm always trying to get students and even adults to think about crazy ways that technology and art can come together. I keep close tabs on the Burning Man community. I've gone to our local regional burns, and a lot of the art there is open source,
right.
Which is fantastic. You just don't usually think of it that way.
Right. Oh, tell me about your local burns in New York State.
Yeah, we have one called Portal Burn. There's a lot of great artists there. It's hopped around a few locations and it's less than 400 people, but there's a fantastic community behind it.
I didn't even know that. Gee, that is interesting. That is interesting. Wow. And, New York State, I consider it a place of great creativity with Cornell there and Corning and University of Buffalo. They actually have, there's a whole creativity institute at the University of Buffalo. I've been following them for 30 years. Very interesting. Very, very interesting.
You also never, oh, go ahead.
Do you know what they do at Cornell is they invent new vegetables. There's a new vegetable that was invented called honey nut squash. It's a more tasty version of the butternut squash. So it's interesting. I consider the geography of New York State to be one of ingenuity.
You never know what you're going to find across the state. One of my favorite things that I've done in the last couple of years is I've represented New York State within the Nation of Makers initiative.
Right.
Originally out of the White House in 2016, where I got to go and represent there, and then continued on as we became a nonprofit. But a few years ago, back in 2017, I ran a statewide summit, and we had maker spaces and makers and educators and politicians all over the state come to one area and just traded tips, tricks. We had people trading different supplies. And I mean, there are maker spaces across just about every city in New York State, from Buffalo, Syracuse, Ithaca, Utica, Poughkeepsie, Troy. One of my favorite makerspaces in the state is in Troy. It is a massive makerspace. It's probably one of the largest in New York State, and it's out of an old department store. And my favorite thing is you can actually look at, because of the old department store windows, you could look in and see people making.
Oh, this is worth the whole interview with you. So I have a brother who lives in Ithaca area. And so next time I'm in New York State, I'm driving to Troy just to see this place. Right. That is
in Ithaca, you got to visit Ithaca Generator.
Oh, I've been there before. Downstairs, I've been there. It's fantastic. Buddha's down there.
Yep.
And I asked Buddha, I said, what are your hours here? He goes, if things are interesting, I don't go home. So it's so interesting. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. It says he's there, he likes the space, and if there's activities going, then there is no closing time. And that was really the very best answer, because people who are in the creative zone, they don't want to hear about limits.
Yeah.
A limit is where you're out of your creative zone, and it's also, a limit is a different form of a disappointment. So the Wright brothers, when they're working on their plane, they had a staggered sleep schedule so that they could get more work done. It was fascinating. One of them would wake up early in the morning, get ready, and then the other one would sleep 4 more hours, and they would work together, and then one goes to sleep and the other would work for another 5 or 6 hours. And so their work day was 18-hour work day.
Oh, I believe it.
And that's actually how they were able to make such progress, because they were not only inventors of a device, they were inventors of a process. So that was interesting. Well, Dan, I want to come back and talk to you some more. We're trying this on Jitsi. I love open source, and this is my first experiment with Jitsi doing the recording using Jitsi recording. So let's wrap this up, see how it goes, and then if for some reason we need to do it again, we'll just do it again. But thank you so much. You got such interesting stories to tell. Dan Schneiderman up in Rochester, New York.
Thanks for having me.